It doesn't take but a second to show somebody the second half of the book of Exodus or the book of Leviticus to where you don't see somebody's mouths fall open and people start saying, "Why is this in the Bible?" I get it. When Bible scholars look in the first 5 books of the Bible, they notice many sources that were drawn in to make what we call those books the Pentateuch or the Torah. But when you look at them, those particular parts that the final editor of those 5 books drew into the collection, you see that in those parts the priests and priestly influences were driven to think that somebody needed to talk about how we worship, and that worship itself, as much of a gift as it is also a cost. And so the Leviticus chapters, which go on and on with some really bizarre stuff, call forth the question of how, when we are wounded, do we relate to God? And so sacrifice is the way it's described often. It's pretty bizarre, but you know what? In some way, we all know we are wounded, that there is cost to being people of honor. And Leviticus goes off in some directions I can hardly explain to you, other than saying there was a longing for a kind of a common pattern of life so that they could recognize each other. But that's not what I want you to really pick up. There was this final editor who looked at that material and looked at the Yahwist, that simple story in Genesis 2 and 3, and that Elohist, that complicated big picture God that you see in Genesis 1, and saw Leviticus and said, you know, this belongs too. Somehow to know that the journey of worship is a calling, it's a demanding and yet rewarding journey, and that somehow it needs to be something we coordinate and do together and engage in together. That final editor was so bright to hear God's voice and see God's word in such disparate sources that Genesis through Deuteronomy can read like, you know, ping pong sort of, or juggling all kinds of different points of view. But some final editor said all of those are where you can hear God. This is the season of Epiphany, where we acknowledge the ways revelation happens. And it happens in lots of ways. Keep your eyes trained and your ears too, because you are love first.